Alright, I'm going to try this again. Since someone wanted to point out that I forgot to draw in on my little diagram having a trans brake input, because I assumed that people would know that they already needed that, but I guess I shouldn't have assumed. Anyway, this is a video on how to set up the bump box in Holley EFI using the solid state relay. The part number is 554-111. You got your battery. This is all just for reference. We didn't draw in, a fuse or relay or anything like that. Just use good common wiring practices. So anyway, this indicates your battery, positive. This is your bump button. This is your trans brake button. This is the solid state relay, which is, Holley calls it a nitrous driver. It's part number 554-111. This line here is indicated by another part number 554-128, which is the input protection module from Holley. But anyway, this is a diagram of how you would wire this. This is about the simplest way to get a bump box working without having to buy anything additional besides the $80 relay. And you should already have this trans brake protection module in your wiring harness, or you should already add it into your wiring. But we can't assume that you already have, so I will point it out for Scott Evans and Chris Pinney to make them happy. This little line right here, that's showing a red wire coming off of your trans brake button and into an input in the ECU. I hope you're happy. Anyway, sorry, I just did this video and it kind of went south. So anyway, this is your diagram. Now we'll get into the setup of it on the screen. So here's your I/O table. You're going to pull this up. You have to create an input for your bump button. Don't mind all this other stuff here. But anyway, you're going to create a 20 volt input. So right here, input number 7, bump button. Drop down menu, bring it to 20 volt. Okay, it is not defined yet. Okay, we're going to enable it. Go to configure. There's nothing to configure, but it's just kind of force a habit. We're also going to create the output real quick. I call it bump out. It's pulse width modulation negative. So in your pull down menu, pick a PWM negative. Again, it's not defined. Click enable. This you actually have to configure. So switched input triggers. You're only going to have one. This output will activate when the trans brake launch is enabled. I'll make a separate video to show how to enable this, or how to wire this and how to set this up in the software. And I'm going to make it just for Scott Evans and for Chris Pinney, and anybody else can enjoy it if they'd like. But anyway, we're going to assume that you already have an input from your trans brake to the ECU. There's nothing to do here in linked outputs. There's nothing to do here in timer. This is where you have to work is PWM setup. So I'm going to make sure that the type is fixed, not RPM derived. This setup was for a Turbo 400 with a pretty loose converter. So these settings are going to have to be tailored to your needs. But I found frequency seems to work best between 15 and 18. Your table units is going to be duty cycle. Okay, so this is what we're doing here is this is the measured duty cycle across that solid state relay. Your x-axis, I use RPM, but it could be boost also. This setup, my deal was very consistent with leaving on the same RPM and boost that we commanded, so we just used RPM. And then the y-axis is going to be your bump button, which is your actual voltage. Okay, so this is the voltage that the ECU sees. So when you're not pressing the bump button, it doesn't see any voltage. So when it doesn't see any voltage, this whole area right here is 100%, which means the trans brake works like it's supposed to. No interruption, okay? When it sees voltage of 9.3 volts, just a number I picked, it's going to, if we're at 3,900 RPM and down, it's going to open up that relay and pulse it to 63% duty cycle of the relay. So this is something that you're gonna have to fine tune for your own combo. If you, like I said, this is a 148 first gear turbo 400 and a pretty loose converter. 63 was pretty much the magic number. It stayed very consistent. If you ever saw our car race, it was very smooth. It would creep into the beams. You didn't have to hold down the foot brake or anything. It was just very smooth and creep right in. But as you increase power or RPM or boost, whatever you want to use for your x-axis, you're going to want to start to taper these numbers up, which means it's getting closer to not pulsing the solenoid at all. So, or I'm sorry, the solid state relay, not the solenoid. So this will be something that you have to kind of fine tune with a power glide. It seemed to work best around 75 to 80. So just use it as reference. Don't take my 100% word for it. It's going to be something that you're going to have to play with. But anyway, that's all there is for the setup. Again, you've got your input bump button right here. You don't have to configure anything. Output, bump out, pulse width modulation negative, enable, and we just went through the configure. Now you have to pin map it. Go to your pin map, and it'll bring up your 20 volt input, which is your bump button. Click and drag it to whatever spot you've wired it to. Just find one that's got a 2 in there. And drop it. Go to your outputs. You'll have the same thing. Bump out, P minus. Click, drag it, and drop it. Now we'll go over the wiring quick, just to make sure that we all understand it on the same page. Here's your battery. You got power coming out. It hits the bump button on one side. The other side, it is ran to your 20 volt input that we just went over in your pin map. So wherever that went, the input, whichever one it is. So you got power coming out of here, going to the trans brake button on one side. On the other side of the trans brake button, you have to split off right here. Orange wire from the solid state relay, part number 554-111. The orange wire is the in, which is your out from the trans brake button. Tag off of that wire and also run another wire right here that you should have already had ran for your trans brake, but we can't assume for Scott and Chris. So you're going to tag that wire here and interrupt it with that part number right there. 554128. That is the input protection module from Holley. So make sure you put that in there, follow the instructions on that. I can help if you don't understand it. But again, you'll put that to another input and just do a 12 volt, high side input off into your ECU. Out of the solid state relay, you got 2 more wires to deal with. The blue one, which is a heavy gauge wire, it's pretty long, is going to go down to the positive side of your trans brake solenoid, underneath the car, trans brake solenoid. The black wire with a yellow tracer is a pulse width modulation negative. That is the output that we created. So whatever pin you are on, you're going to run that wire to the output in the ECU. This comes already pre-terminated for the pin for the ECU. It's pretty long, so either coil it up if you want your wiring to look ugly, or cut it to length and put a new terminal on it. Any questions, feel free to ask. Thanks.